Hey y'all, this is Megan Green, your Virgo bestie, astrologer, and tarot reader. And it's been a minute since you've seen me. I have definitely taken a pause on recording the weekly big threes in video format, but I have still been writing them and posting them on Instagram. So if you've not been following me there, please consider doing so now. My handle is at mercurial_Megan. And as a mercurial girly, I just tend to feel a little bit stronger and a little bit more comfortable with the written word. So I have transitioned to that for a while. We'll probably continue to do that for a little bit, and maybe eventually I'll come back to doing video form, but not right now. But I am here today. I am happy to be here making this video, and it's truthfully been a hot minute since I've even felt inspired to talk about anything or post anything on this chart or on this page. And I usually am inspired by something that's going on in pop culture or in music, and that is no different now. I have recently been enjoying the new projects from J.Cole and baby Keem. And obviously, if you've watched any of my material in the past, you know that I've done extensive videos on Kendrick Lamar and his birth chart as well. And so these three are kind of bridged together or tied together with Kendrick Lamar in the center, as he has, a past with J.Cole and is the cousin to baby Keem. So there seems to be this running thread between the three of them that I've noticed. And I also noticed that they are all three air signs, and they are all each a different air sign. And so it just got me thinking about what the air signs represent, what their different archetypes are, how they show up within their unique expression. And I really wanted to spend some time looking at their charts and examining how the current transits may also be impacting, the material that they've been releasing, or, just what is their unique purpose within the industry, based on their natal charts and based on their sun signs, in addition to everything else. So I want to kind of tap into that today. And so the three air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Kendrick Lamar is a Gemini, baby Keem is a Libra, and J. Cole is an Aquarius. And they each have a very distinct and unique perspective in the hip hop community that I feel like is beautifully represented through their sign and planetary archetypes. So let's get into that. Okay, so we have 12 signs in the zodiac, and these 12 signs are broken down into 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Our fire signs are Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. Our earth signs are Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. Our air signs are Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. And our water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Each planet, each sign is also connected to a ruling planet. And in the case of the air signs, which we're going to focus on today, Gemini is ruled by the planet Mercury, Libra is ruled by the planet Venus, and Aquarius is ruled by the planet Saturn in traditional Hellenistic astrology, which is what I generally practice. But in modern techniques or theories, it is also connected to the planet Uranus. But today we're going to focus more on Saturn. Each one of these has very specific archetypes or themes or jobs that are connected to them. And so I did want to spend some time discussing Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius and their planetary rulers in connection to these 3 artists. So let's start with Gemini and Kendrick Lamar, since he is kind of our statement artist who connects both of these other 2 artists together as well. And that is very, indicative of the Gemini archetype in a lot of ways. So Gemini is a mutable air sign. Mutable signs are flexible, adaptable, changing. They correspond to the periods of the seasons when we are transitioning from one season to another. So we get Gemini season when we are going from, like spring to summer. And so there is a freshness, there is a lightness, there's a little bit of a playfulness that goes along with that energy. Gemini is a double bodied sign and is represented by the twins. So oftentimes Gemini gets this association with being kind of two sided, maybe a little bipolar, maybe a little, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde vibe going on, but there's this duality to Gemini energy that is very pronounced and very unique to that sign. Gemini is also sort of the student of the zodiac. It is constantly learning and wanting to consume information and wanting to exchange ideas and thoughts, and is very chatty and communicative. It's very much the social butterfly of the zodiac. It is also, with its connection to Mercury, Mercury was considered the trickster of the Greek gods, or it non-binary. Mercury can be both like feminine or masculine, depending on what the moment requires. Mercury was also considered a bit of a psychopomp, so it was able to sort of exist in between worlds, both like the spirit realm and the earthly realm. It ushered souls down into the spirit realm. So there's lots of connections to Mercury and travel and transit, or just movability, flexibility, adaptability. Mercury is also the planet of communication, intellect, exchange. And so oftentimes we see mercurially strong placements being our writers, our teachers, our rappers. There are a lot of very prominent and famous rappers that are born underneath the sign of Gemini. I could sit here and just list Tupac, Biggie, Kendrick, who else do we have? Lauryn Hill. There are just so many of Kanye West, the big juggernauts that are born underneath the sign of Gemini. And it's truly because they have this natural knack for communication and exchange. And so, Mercury was the messenger to the gods. And so in a lot of ways, those who are born underneath the sign of Gemini are here to tell us something. They're here to teach us something, to share information, to, bring the message of the gods down to those of us on earth. And I really feel like Kendrick is a beautiful example of that, in the way that he has used his skill and talent to really speak to the common person. He is someone who was raised in Compton, in a very strong gang environment that was, very kind of tumultuous. And there was a lot of, negative things that he might have been easily swept up in, but he was able to really use his intellect to navigate that world, but then also to kind of bring some wisdom or some messages or some, better opportunities to that same space as well. And so I really see him as this beautiful Gemini representative. And I also see parts of him that sort of represent the more playful or trickster energies of Gemini as well, which I think is easily represented through the beef that he had with Drake. I think a lot of people previously only saw Kendrick as being sort of a serious, maybe not so fun, but, thoughtful, smart, Pulitzer winning prize person. And that's one side of that Gemini archetype. But then there's also this kind of petty, spiteful, willing to kind of be the devil on one shoulder that also came out through that exchange. And we saw a different side of him through that, or, those of us who have been following Kendrick knew that always existed, but that showed up a little bit more strongly during that event. And I won't spend too much time on Kendrick's chart because I've already talked about him extensively in my other videos, but I will reference you to those videos so that you can check a full breakdown of his chart. But he is a beautiful Gemini archetype, and he perfectly represents that bridge between two worlds and the, being the speaker box to the gods. A lot of times in his raps, he mentions things like Metatron, Enoch. There's lots of references to the messenger throughout, history, throughout myths, and he is keenly aware of that and really owns that. And so he is the perfect representative for Gemini and for Mercury. He's also, a connector, right? So even though he has a very strong personal voice and message that he wants to get across, he's also spent, a good deal of his life and career connecting and networking and, plugging people together, or, working within a system or in some sort of pairing or with another. We see that with his business partnership with Dave Free. We see that with his connection to baby Keem. Gemini is often looking for its twin. It's, someone that it can sort of partner with. And even in his long-term relationship with his partner, Whitney, we see that sort of pairing or that desire to have like a mirror or, a partner in crime. And so that is how I'm kind of seeing Kendrick represent Gemini and the planet Mercury. The second air sign that we're going to discuss today is Libra, and baby Keem is our representative of that sign and of the planet Venus. Now, this is baby Keem's birth chart. We do not have a birth time for him, so this is not going to be accurate in terms of the angles, so the ascendant, descendant, MC, and the IC, or the house placement. But when I don't know the birth time, I just put the sun sign in the first house representing the native of the chart. And so baby Keem is a 29-degree Libra sun. And so he was born on the final day of Libra season, and 29 degrees of a sign in astrology is considered an anaretic degree, which is like the final gasp of that sign, the last expression of that sign and that energy. And so there tends to be a lot of like urgency with planets that are placed in this final degree. And so baby Keem has his sun there at 29 degrees. And so he's really here to make a statement. He is here to do something, to say something, to kind of use this last gasp of breath to make an impact. And that impact is going to be Libran and Venusian in nature. And so we discussed what Gemini and Mercury was about. Libra's got a totally different vibe. Libra is also kind of dualistic, as its symbol is the scales. And so there's this weighing that kind of goes on with it. Whereas with Gemini, it's more about like two different identities or two different ideas. With Libra, it is sort of the balance or the harmony, the harmonizing of two people or two concepts. Libra is the sign of fairness, justice, partnership, connection. Libra is probably, even though all three of the air signs are relational, I would say that Libra is probably the most relational, as it is connected to like commitments and contracts and, wanting to really be officially paired. And so I think it's really interesting that both Kendrick and baby Keem have this desire to be partnered up. And so Kendrick is certainly partnered with baby Keem. Baby Keem is certainly desiring partnership with Kendrick, and they both have this sort of symbiotic connection with one another that benefits them both, which I think is beautiful. Venus is a relational planet, which I think is also why, Libra gets a little bit of a heavier weight when it comes to partnerships and connections when we're talking about these air signs. Because it is ruled by the planet Venus, Venus is about love, connection, friendship, partnership, beauty, aesthetics, music, art. All of that is really connected with Venus, and then also connected to Libra, through that pairing. And what we can kind of see in baby Keem is that he has a very defined artistic sensibility. He is, I believe, 25 years old. He's pretty young, but he has a really strong artistic presence and artistic voice. And you can tell that through, the beats that he makes, through the way that he raps and his style of rapping, through his visual choices in his music videos, and in the way that he presents himself. And there's also this sort of like feminine essence that comes along with Baby Keem and some of his work. He is a lot of his music centers around women in some way, whether he's talking about his mother and his grandmother, or he's talking about, relations with women that he might be interested in. He seems to be talking about women or interacting with women in his work more than these other two artists do. And so I think that is very uniquely, connected to his Libran and Venusian presence and dominance. He also seems to be a little bit more of like a lover boy, a little bit more sensitive sometimes in his work or in his, choices artistically. And a lot of his music videos really kind of focus on women, and not just any women, like gorgeous women, beautiful women. I really feel like Baby Keem likes women. And, I have certainly made this comment on other platforms that I've discussed this on, but you can tell when a man, just enjoys women for whatever selfish kind of reasons they enjoy them, but like they don't really want to connect with them personally. Baby Keem really seems to like and enjoy and respect women. And so again, I feel like that is something connected to his Libra Venusian qualities. That is really beautiful, and it's very sweet, and it's very endearing, and there's kind of like this softness and this kindness that comes along with what he's presenting. Even though he's still saying sometimes very crude things, they're kind of done in a way that like a woman would be like, oh oh, Keem. It's not as like demeaning as some of these other rappers are when they talk about women or their connection to women. And so he's got a very strong Venus presence. When we look at where Venus is in Baby Keem's chart, it is in the sign of Sagittarius, and it's connected to the planet Pluto and to the asteroid Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer. So we all have Chiron somewhere in our chart, and wherever it is, it sort of emphasizes where we've got this sort of internalized wound that's probably going to be triggered and activated at various times throughout our life in order for us to heal it and address it and sort of, deal with some of that energy. And so for Baby Keem, it's in the sign of Sagittarius, which makes a sextile to Libra. And so there is sort of like an easy flowing connection, but it does require a little bit of effort. So when we see Venus in Sagittarius connected to the planet Pluto, it intensifies Venus that much more. It makes it that much more powerful, that much more impactful. Venus represents women. And so it is going to be, about his artistic leanings, but it's also going to be about his romantic relationships or just the women in his life in general, or how he sort of perceives the feminine or connects to the feminine. So again, with it being connected to Pluto, it makes sense that maybe that's a little bit more of an intense storyline for him, or a bigger theme that shows up in his life. With Chiron, again, there's some sort of wounding there that wants to be healed, and Pluto also kind of wants to transform that energy in some way. Sagittarius is a sign that is very expansive, growth-oriented. It's got a lot of luck and a lot of like optimism tied to it as well. So even though Pluto and Chiron are intense kind of energies, the Sagittarian influence kind of makes that not as heavy. It makes it something usable. It makes it something that is able to be expanded upon, or that can be a source of growth. Or a source of abundance in some way. Sagittarius, like Gemini, is a mutable sign, so there's a flexibility there. It's not getting stuck in its ways. It's a little bit more willing to change and adapt, and we can kind of see that even in the way that Baby Keem expresses himself. So if you've listened to a lot of his music, he has a lot of different vocal expressions that he uses. on every track, his voice sounds a little different. There's a lot of changeability there. There's a playfulness there. He doesn't really take himself all that seriously, even when he's talking about kind of dark and heavy things. There's always sort of this like gotcha moment, or a little bit of a nudge and a wink that comes along with it. And I think that is just a byproduct of Sagittarius coloring that Venusian quality and then funneling that energy into that Libra sun. Now, even though I don't have his birth time, that means it also might shift what his moon sign is. And so in this version of the chart with the sun in the first house, it puts his moon in the sign of Leo. He could be a Leo moon. Leo moons do tend to be expressive and creative, and obviously he is an artist, so he could very well be a Libra moon. But I'm also wondering if he might be a Virgo moon. Virgo is the other sign that is ruled by Mercury, and so there is a lot of sort of intellect that goes along with having a Virgo moon. They're very thoughtful, very pensive. They are, constantly tweaking or, in the lab working on something, trying to improve something or make something better. He does have his Mars there, so maybe that's kind of what I'm picking up on as well, other than the moon. But he might be a Virgo moon. I often see, we have a ton of Gemini rappers for sure, but we also have a lot of Virgo rappers. So we have Big Crit, Wiz Khalifa, Ludacris, Big Daddy Kane, A$AP Rock has a Virgo moon. There's a lot of Virgo placements within hip hop as well. And that is, again, because of that mercurial connection of being a messenger, of needing to, share and exchange information. And so I could definitely see Keem having his moon there. He does seem to be a little bit more reserved, which would also kind of lean a bit more into a Virgo moon versus a Leo moon. But again, that could just be his Mars kind of overtaking it, because Mars is that more masculine energy. I mean, maybe that's just how he sort of represents himself. But I could easily see him being a Virgo moon as well. We do see Virgo moon placements a lot with like producers, and baby Keem really got his start more behind the scenes, sort of being in the lab, crafting, different beats, being more tech-based, more technical, doing, again, a little bit more tweaking. Some of the more like minor, details is very Virgo oriented. So either way, that moon placement is definitely expressing himself creatively, whether that be through that Leo lens, which is a bit more playful and a bit more like outwardly creative, or through that Virgo archetype, which again is more perfectionistic and more kind of like service oriented or kind of behind the scenes. I'm also wondering if he might be a Cancer rising. And I think that because so much of his work centers around his mother and the story of his mother and his grandmother who also raised him. And so Cancer is the sign of the maternal lineage. It is about comfort. It is about, the mom story, security, emotional needs, things like that. I also wonder if he is a Cancer rising because he does kind of have a bit more of a moon-shaped face. He's a little bit more darker or mysterious, a little bit rounder, a little bit softer. And so that was just something that I kind of noticed. And certainly that feminine energy could just be showing up through the Venus aspects, but I'm really feeling it strongly with Cancer and his moon placement as well. So he's got, again, a little bit more sensitivity, a little bit more of a willingness to kind of be emotional, which, I don't necessarily know that a bunch of young men his age are willing to kind of be vulnerable in that way. But with Cancer or with a strong moon placement, you see that a little bit more in males or through their artistry as well. I also thought it was funny that one of his sort of nicknames or, tags that he uses a lot in his work is two phone baby Keem. And so he's always talking about how he has two phones, which again sort of reminds me of that Libra duality of like trying to balance these two different, things that are constantly coming at you. Oftentimes, in his most recent video, he's talking about two women. There's some sort of like balancing of that energy as well. Keem also has his North Node in the sign of Cancer. And so the North Node represents where you're supposed to be moving toward, something that you're supposed to be attaining in this lifetime, skills that you're supposed to be developing. And he has that in the sign of Cancer. And so he is kind of leaning more into this sort of nurturing, sentimental, family-based quality and kind of representing it to its fullest, or wanting to kind of lean into that more, whereas his South Node in Capricorn was more achievement-based, more about, I want to get to the top of the hill. I am ambitious. I'm creating this tradition, or really trying to make a statement about what I can do and who I can be and the legacy that I want to leave behind. And so he comes from a past life experience of being able to do that, which could also just represent some of his early life. A lot of times when we see the South Node in Capricorn, it represents someone who maybe had to grow up really early in their life and maybe didn't get a chance to be fully nurtured or fully tap into just being a kid, which we have definitely seen through some of his work as well. And with the North Node being in Cancer, he's being called to kind of lean more into nurturing himself and others and tapping into those, deeper emotions in his life and not just being solely focused on, what can be achieved. Some of this, again, this is definitely a security access on both ends, but it's less about material security, which might be more of the comfort zone for him, especially maybe coming from an upbringing where material security was, not as consistent. He might have felt a real desire to build that or to have material items more, but now we need to kind of lean more into that North Node of Cancer, which is more like emotional security. I also wanted to talk a bit about the transits that baby Keem has been experiencing recently. So on February 20th, he released his latest album, Casino. And a lot of it has to do with growing up in Las Vegas, the story of, the sort of complicated and maybe kind of traumatic relationships that he had with his family and his mother, being raised by his grandmother, and how he's been able to kind of, make his life kind of successful or, move forward from that and kind of help his family through that process. And so what I thought was really interesting is that he released that album on the day that we had the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries at 0 degrees and with the transit moon in Aries as well. This is a like once in a lifetime transit that I don't think is accidental. I know these motherfuckers have an astrologer. And I also, again, wonder if baby Keem is a Cancer rising, because then that would put Aries in the 10th house of career, reputation, and status, and this being sort of like a landmark statement moment for his career. So that was definitely interesting. And again, all of that energy opposes his sun in Libra, even though it's by a very wide orb. That 0 degrees Aries stuff is at the beginning of the sign. That 29-degree Libra sun is at the end of the sign, but it's still, in opposition energetically on that axis. So it is a bit of a statement of like, kind of individuating or being a little bit more autonomous, or again, making a personal statement of like, I am here. This is who I am. I am both, defining myself, but then also sort of dissolving an old identity or narrative. And we also have Chiron co-present in the sign of Aries, which again is touching on some of those wounds and maybe traumas or more difficult experiences that he's hopefully been able to heal through. We also had transit Mars on his Uranus. So again, this is activating, this is shocking, this is exciting, this is sort of, a bold statement, kind of, a passion project, I'm sure, for him in a lot of ways. We also had transit Juno sitting right on his South Node. So again, commitment to, in the sign of Capricorn, a family lineage or a tradition, but also on the South Node being like releasing it, letting it go, releasing this story to the world, and allowing that to make a statement. And on the opposite side, we had Jupiter right on his North Node. So Jupiter, again, being the planet of blessings and expansion, luck, abundance on the North Node, the direction that he's heading into this lifetime. Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer. Cancer, again, being about family, ancestry, the maternal lineage, emotions, feelings. All of that is kind of just being opened up and echoed for him to, kind of present and feel through the world in a way that was very well received. And then we also have planets in Pisces, the Sun, the North Node, Venus, and Mercury standing opposite his Mars in Virgo, and maybe also his Moon in Virgo if his Moon is there. And that to me, again, is just sort of like a reflection of his hard work, a reflection of his effort. The things that you were kind of crafting and working on and diligently tinkering with behind the scenes are now sort of getting that artistic recognition and being kind of like thrusting you into, a fated destiny, which is very Piscean in nature, right? The artist. And I really do feel like Keem has made a statement with this recent project, and that this is going to be kind of like one of those landmark moments in his life that defines his career from here on out. I love doing family synastry charts, because they're very connected and very revealing, and this is no different. Inside, we have baby Keem, and then on the outer wheel, we have Kendrick Lamar's chart. And we do have a time chart for Kendrick, so we know he is a Libra rising. And so I'm able to kind of keep baby Keem's Libra sun in that first house position as well. And what we see is that Kendrick's ascendant at 22 degrees falls pretty tightly on baby Keem's sun at 29 degrees of Libra. And so the way that Kendrick sees the world or kind of, presents himself to the world is very much in line with baby Keem's identity and sense of self. And so they're very, it's just an easy kind of bond. When someone has their ascendant on your sun, they just see you. They see things the way that you see things. They're able to see the best in you, and kind of maybe even direct you in ways that maybe you aren't as easily tapped into because they've just got a higher perspective of that energy than maybe you do. We also see that Kendrick's Pluto is right on top of baby Keem's Mercury retrograde in the sign of Scorpio. And so Mercury, again, is going to be that planet of communication, thought, connection. Pluto is the planet of death, rebirth, and transformation. So Kendrick is able to transform the way that Keem communicates or thinks or kind of empowers him in some way as well. We also see that Kendrick's Saturn retrograde falls right on top of baby Keem's Chiron, Pluto, and Venus connection. And so I really kind of see that as Kendrick stepping up as like a father figure, also being kind of like a mentor or a guide in some way, and also kind of helping Keem heal those chironic wounds and triggers. And instead of going through like maybe a negative path, really showing him, a different, more successful or beneficial route through, Saturn's guidance and discipline. I also see that, Kendrick's Venus falls right on top of baby Keem's Jupiter retrograde in the sign of Gemini. And Jupiter and Venus are the two benefics of the planets. And so that means they're just a little bit more pleasurable or enjoyable or a little bit more helpful. And so when those join in the sky, it's just like we're having a good time. We're playful, we're having fun, we're silly. And you can kind of see that in the way that they exchange, the way that they show up in their creative projects as well, tends to be, there's always, again, this like little nudge or this little playful vibe that comes along with it. The first song that I'm really thinking of is Hillbillies, where they have, this is really silly back and forth. I'm thinking of like the top of the morning lyrics. And it's just silly, and it's probably like their inside jokes, but it's very, funny and light and playful and just a good time. And again, in the sign of Gemini, it's just kind of this trickster, little kid vibe going on. And the last thing that I'll mention is that Kendrick's Mercury and Mars falls on baby Keem's North Node. So again, another indication that like Kendrick is there to guide Keem into his destiny or into a fated opportunity or into the man that he's supposed to be. And so it's really sweet to kind of see these connections in the chart, and just the way the universe kind of surrounds you with the people that you need in order to achieve the things that you need to achieve, or especially, that is the case for these two. All right, now let's talk about J.Cole, our Aquarian and our Saturn representative. Again, I do not have a birth time for J.Cole, so I went ahead and I put his sun on the ascendant in the first house. And so we do see here that he has an 8-degree sun in Aquarius. And Aquarius is the mad scientists of the zodiac. They are very intellectual, but sort of progressive and experimental and maybe a little bit offbeat. They are ruled by the planet Saturn, which is kind of about like tradition, legacy, the father figures, karma, debts, lessons that need to be learned. But that is a little bit more tied to, that understanding of Saturn is a little bit tied more to Capricorn, which again kind of is a bit more traditional, or about generational energies or what's always been done. Whereas Saturn in the sign of Aquarius is like, okay, well, how do I leap off of what's been done and do something new? How do I take the, traditions and the things that have been established before me and elevate them forward? And so that is where we see Aquarius being a little bit more rebellious, a little bit more willing to experiment, and kind of go on their own path. Aquarius can sometimes be, affiliated with being kind of detached. They can be loners. They can be a little bit more willing to kind of just be rebellious and be the outcast. And so we have kind of seen J.Cole go his own way, even though he's really tried to do the traditional, hip hop thing and, sign with Jay-Z and, do all of the expected things. He always kind of eventually goes his own way. And we even see that through, again, the beef between Drake and Kendrick. Like initially, J.Cole kind of wanted to participate in the back and forth, and then he was just like, I don't think so. Like, this really isn't for me, and I don't really care what anybody has to say about it. I'm just going to go do my own thing. And that is very Aquarian in nature. Aquarius often gets the, reputation of being kind of aloof and very detached. And it's not that Aquarius doesn't have deep feelings or want to kind of connect and express. It's just that it's able to kind of pull itself out of the equation and look down from a bird's eye view and sort of just observe things and then, intellectualize things from there. And so a big critique of J.Cole throughout the years is like, people don't really feel that emotionally connected to him, or like, yes, he's a great storyteller, or yes, he has a lot to say, or yes, he's very, proficient in his rap styles, but it kind of lacks a little bit more of that, emotional connection. And I think that comes from this Aquarius placement. Now, Aquarius, again, is ruled by the planet Saturn, and his Saturn is in the sign of Scorpio, conjunct the South Node. So Saturn, again, is the father figures, lessons, karma, setbacks, discipline, maturity. And the South Node represents past life experiences, what you've already kind of mastered and what you need to move away from. And the sign of Scorpio is kind of deep, kind of intense, kind of private, very psychological, kind of brooding, very resourceful, but not really in a way where it's trying to share a lot, but kind of collecting a lot of information. And so that Aquarius sun is going to revert back to that Saturn in Scorpio. And a big part of J. Cole's storyline has been about the lack of relationship that he had with his birth father, right? And so that has been kind of shrouded in some element of secrecy or detachment for him as well. But connected to the South Node, there's some, sort of karma that's happening there. And there's also kind of this intense privacy and this heavy sense of responsibility. And it's also kind of about integrity for him as well. And so he might feel with the South Node there that he's kind of constantly pulled back by that desire to stay maybe private, to stay kind of hidden. This is not a lighthearted energy at all. And it might be kind of consuming or kind of controlling in a lot of ways. But there's just there's a skepticism that comes along with this placement. And I think it's kind of connected to that paternal storyline for him in some way. And it often, he feels like there's with such strong Saturn placements, it might feel like you're constantly being kind of judged or, weighed in terms of like, are you doing the right thing or not? And if not, like, you face the consequences pretty quickly. Like, you're not able to kind of get away with the same things that maybe, Drake or Kendrick were able to get away with in that beef. I think, a part of why he pulled out was because, like, it is not karmically aligned for me. This is not aligned with my morals or, the way that I discipline myself. And so his identity is tied to this connection for him as well. We also see that he has pretty strong placements in Capricorn. He's got his Neptune there, Mercury, and Jupiter there. And so Neptune in Capricorn makes him able to sort of build something that is artistic in value or a little bit more dreamy or a little bit more spiritual. But Capricorn, again, is another sign that's ruled by Saturn. So it's still kind of constrained. It's still a little bit more businesslike. It's still kind of tight. It's not as fluid as Neptune in another sign might be. His Mercury being conjunct Jupiter is, again, a very strong intellect. Mercury in Capricorn is kind of blunt. It's very business oriented. It's kind of straight to the facts. And Jupiter, again, is a very expansive planet that wants to grow, that wants movement, that wants to, exchange or has a lot of ideas. And so connected together, he does have this ability to be verbose or to, communicate ideas very directly. But also it's still kind of tight. It's not soft. It's not fluid. It's not, emotional in nature. It's just kind of like, this is how it is. This is what I know. These are the facts. This is my story, and this is all I'm going to tell you about it, because it goes back to that Scorpio energy, which is kind of private. Like, I'm only going to let you know what I want you to know. He does have some things that kind of soften that up a little bit, and that would be his Venus and Mars in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is a very dreamy sign. It is also ruled by the planet Jupiter, so that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn speaks to this energy in Pisces. And so Venus and Mars together do give him that creative ability to be sensitive, to tap into music and to flow and to, harmony and to beat and sound. But again, it all kind of reverts back to Saturn in some way. And even just on a soundscape, perspective, J.Cole is very beat heavy. Saturn and Capricorn are drums. Like, it's very rhythmic in nature. It's not as melodic as, certainly not as melodic as Baby Keem, but even Kendrick has a little bit more, melodic sensibility than I would say J.Cole does. And so it's not surprising to me that J.Cole kind of taps into a more masculine leaning audience. Girls certainly like him, but I would not say if you're going to a J.Cole show that you're going to see a lot of women in the audience. He does tend to be a little bit more leaning to the masculine and the masculine perspective. Now, because I do not have a set birth time for him, I am not sure if he is an Aries moon or a Taurus moon. I lean towards him maybe being a Taurus moon, because an Aries moon would be willing to fight. And a Taurus moon is more concerned with like comfort and stability and just kind of keeping things the way that they are and kind of consistent, being a fixed sign, similar to Aquarius being a fixed sign, and Scorpio being a fixed sign. So again, there's just a little bit more rigidity there, where like an Aries moon would be impulsive, an Aries moon would be reactive, an Aries moon would be willing to kind of go in. And, maybe he is an Aries moon. There's certainly, a possibility for that. But I kind of lean more towards him being a Taurus moon. And that is also where his North Node is. So he's being drawn into more stable, grounded, humble, earthy lifestyles and energies and perspectives versus, a fast-paced lifestyle, which would be a little bit more Aries leaning. One thing that I did not mention about Aquarius is that it is about communities and networks and friend groups. And so, I do think a huge part of J. Cole's legacy is more about the masses, more about like getting groups of people together, creating systems, perhaps even more like political in a way, or sort of like revolutionary in a way, getting large groups of people to think differently. And to consider maybe alternative ways of living or thinking or, connecting. He owns a record label, which Kendrick does as well with PG Lang. But J. Cole pretty early in the game had Dreamville, which is also interestingly, kind of connected to that sort of dreamy Pisces energy that we were talking about before, with that Venus Mars conjunction ruled by that Saturn. So Dreamville is the name of his label and his festival. And so there is this kind of like, I have a dream energy that comes with J. Cole. And gosh, I think even Martin Luther King is an Aquarius. Martin would have signed with Dreamville, right? Like, is that the lyric? Anywho, there is, he is more about the people. How can I connect to the people? How can I help the people? How can I give to the people? And J. Cole also notoriously is kind of like a man of the people. He's constantly, seen or spotted around as riding his bike through town, very sort of humble. He is kind of like the everyman's man and really, just connected with society in a way that maybe those other two artists that we've been talking about today are a little bit more distanced. All right, so let's do some quick synastry. J. Cole and Kendrick were 2/3 of the millennial big three of hip hop, which was Kendrick, Drake, and J. Cole. And so they have quite the history of sort of growing up in this industry together. And so I thought it would just be kind of interesting to see how they layer on top of one another. So the inner wheel is going to be J. Cole and the outer wheel is going to be Kendrick Lamar. First thing that I notice is that Kendrick's moon in Pisces falls right on J. Cole's Venus and Mars. So they definitely do have sort of a resonance in terms of how they connect to music, how they express that, maybe how they create music is very, very similar. We also see that Kendrick's Jupiter is hovering near that moon placement, with which granted we don't know exactly where J. Cole's moon is, but even if it was in the early degrees of Taurus, it would still be in loose conjunction with that Jupiter. And so Kendrick's Jupiter again is kind of like spurring growth, spurring, inspiration, like, let's be bigger, let's do more. And so I think, throughout their careers, there probably was, a healthy competition that really inspired growth going both ways. We also see that Kendrick's Venus falls on J. Cole's Chiron in Gemini. And Venus is often, again, associated with like friendship, pleasure, music, beauty, aesthetics. And then that Chiron is a wound. The wounded healer, something that's going to get triggered or activated that wants to be healed. I think probably at one time that Venus on that Chiron was very soothing and very kind of comforting to J. Cole at times. And then I think, when that beef got heated, it was kind of agitating, right? It's kind of like, oh, I thought you were my homie. Like, what the fuck? So that might be some of that, experience for them too. We also see that Kendrick's Saturn is retrograde right on top of J. Cole's Uranus. And so, where that Uranus wants to be kind of free and, you know, a little unpredictable and maybe a little bit of a rebel or a wild child, Kendrick's Saturn kind of dampens that a little bit. It's like, hold your horses. You're not doing it that way. No, we're not going to go there. So, that's kind of an interesting little bit of synastry that they have going on. And then I'll also say that Kendrick's South Node in Libra hovers over J. Cole's Juno. And so Juno is the asteroid of committed partnership. And so the South Node being there does suggest that they had some sort of past life of maybe having some sort of committed partnership or, you know, working together or, you know, really kind of being bound to one another in some way, but it is a past life thing. It's like we're not really going to be doing it like that anymore. So it does kind of make sense that earlier in their career they were a bit more bonded, and now as time goes on they're kind of independently moving in a different way, which is more of that North Node in Aries, which is kind of just like dog eat dog, every man for himself, and that's where Kendrick's North Node is. So he is going to prioritize what he needs to do for himself, whereas J. Cole's North Node is in Taurus and just kind of wants to chill and be comfortable and not really, you know, be too bothered. Kind of keep things in the status quo. All right, y'all. So that was kind of a quick breakdown of our 3 air sign rappers, all 3 of which I love so much. They're so inspiring. They're so brilliant. They are so smart and witty and able to get their messages across in very distinct and unique ways that are very much them. And they've each made an impact on the hip hop community and the music industry at large. And so I could certainly talk about them more in depth. I could go even deeper into, you know, their personal charts and things, but I think this is a pretty good launching pad, and gets out at least some of the things that I wanted to share in terms of how I've been perceiving them and their work and the, you know, the way that these air archetypes kind of fit in. They are each communicating to us, but through a different microphone. Kendrick, again, through the mercurial microphone, Keem through a Venusian lens, and J. Cole through Saturn's wisdom and guidance and maturity. And so I would love to hear what your thoughts are. How do you feel like their placements show up in their work? Let me know your thoughts. As always, I'm your girl Megan, your Virgo bestie, astrologer and tarot reader, and I will see you next time.